Hello! It's an honor to be opening up the first ever Rails SaaS conference. Thank you for having me do this, Andrew. The 1st of January 2020 was a good day. I was really happy. After working on my startup, The Story Graph, every day for 1 year straight, mostly alone, we had recently reached the coveted milestone of 100 user signups. Then, The Story Graph was a book discovery tool that helped you to choose which book to read next. One of the main parts of the website was one large list of a couple thousand books. You could filter it down by mood, pace, fiction, non-fiction, genre, book size, and more. The earliest users had been friends of mine and people that I'd cold DM'd from the books community on Instagram called Bookstagram. Those that saw the promise and potential of what I was working on would politely ask me if they could tell a friend or two about it. I'd say sure, and every other day or so, 1 or 2 new accounts would be created. Knowing that book lovers saw the new year as a chance to set new reading goals, I decided to make an event out of the start of 2020, classing January 1st as the relaunch of our beta, which had already been public for a few months at that point. This gave my keen earlier supporters and followers a little bit more of a push to tell their reading buddies about Storygraph, meaning that we had a tiny bit of extra buzz, and we ended the day on 160 user signups and 100 new unique visitors, each spending an average of 6.5 minutes on the website. I was really happy. Throughout 2019, I'd been heads down, trying to build something that was worthy of sending to people when they asked for book recommendations online, or if an alternative to Goodreads, the world's largest book tracking app, existed. While I didn't set out to build a Goodreads alternative directly, I knew that what I was building had the potential to be a better fit for some. We did, after all, offer a way to import all of your data from Goodreads into the Story Graph. But I had so far to go. Heading into 2020 though, and off the back of this new milestone, I felt energized to keep going. I'd always been afraid to mention what I was working on publicly back then, especially when people wanted to know what book discovery apps were out there. I'd be continually sent articles like this one. But I made the decision not to engage with the authors or the commenters. The product just felt so bare, so basic, and not very pretty. And while by May 2020, I was no longer a solo founder, I had spent most of the product's lifetime working alone. I was still the product sole developer, and I felt rather vulnerable. But having kept my finger on the pulse of social media book communities for the last year, and seeing more and more people each day threaten to start building something new if nobody else did, and with the momentum of the 100 user milestone pushing me on, I felt it was time to start spreading the word. And so on May 27th, I did just that, starting by replying or DMing nearly every one of the 100 or so people who had replied positively to Tatiana's tweet. Most didn't reply, but a handful did. Some didn't like it, or did what I feared they would do, compare it side by side with Goodreads. And that wasn't a contest Storygraph was going to win. Not yet, anyway. But some people understood the project. They saw the potential. They got excited and quizzed me about what I was up to, and most importantly, told 1 or 2 of their reading buddies about it. The 11th of June 2020 was a really good day. I remember I was ecstatic. Just 2 weeks after I started talking about Storygraph more and encouraging people who'd been following along from the beginning to do the same, our user numbers had more than doubled, and we reached 1,000 users. 1,000 signups. The way I threw a celebration on Instagram stories, we had strobe lighting, party music, flames, the whole shebang. 1 week later, it's the 16th of June 2020. I just had a productive morning coding, and I decided to take a quick Twitter break, and I noticed that I have more notifications than usual. Turns out my friend Emma Barnes, who ran publishing company Consonance Books and had a few thousand followers, had recently tweeted this: "Everyone in publishing should stumble upon the Story Graph now, the best bit of innovation to hit the industry in years. don't stand for crappy software from massive tech giants. How lovely of her. We had a little bit of extra activity, but not too much. And I left Twitter shortly after, but then I went back to see if the tweet had even more attention, because activity had started to pick up some more. The first indicator that something was up was the number of unread emails in my inbox. You see, every time somebody kicked off a Goodreads import to Storygraph, they got an email letting them know that their import had begun. And I was CC'd into this email. Normally, I'd see max 4 of these at any given time, but now I just received 8. Turns out Sam Missingham had quote tweeted Emma's tweet with this. Sam is an incredibly well-connected woman in publishing and had 44,000 followers. As you can see, this tweet was even more popular than the original. Eventually, I left Twitter again just to monitor all of the imports and see that they were going through okay. But then the number of unread emails, which had been coming in at a quick but steady pace, started to accelerate. What was going on? Back to Twitter it was. Okay, now Sam's tweet had been quote tweeted. Book Twitter, can we please collectively start using this instead of Goodreads? I've been using it for 5 minutes and it's already so much better. Plus it was founded by a Black woman and it's not run by Amazon. Now this user only had about 200 followers, but the tweet was really resonating as it touched on a few key points. First, it appealed to already thriving community, Book Twitter. And it called out the main app in this space that people were desperately seeking an alternative for. At this point, the murder of George Floyd had occurred only a few weeks before. And while the Black community was still grieving, the energy around the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement was at that moment focused around uplifting Black creators. So calling out my identity as a Black woman would have fed into that. And finally, the mention of Amazon. We're in the midst of the pandemic. Not only was anti-Amazon sentiment heightened during this time, the publishing industry was already sick of them having a monopoly across various swathes of it. So yeah, this tweet was doing well. And we went from having tens to hundreds to thousands of people signing up. And now we had a problem. Remember this email that everybody received? Well, look at that first sentence. Your Goodreads import is underway. This was only really true for a small handful of imports at any given time. Now, thousands of people had just been told a big fat lie. The imports were not, in fact, underway. And the tweets started to roll in. At the rate these imports were running, these people wouldn't have theirs for months. And all of a sudden, everything was very overwhelming. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Between juggling, responding to people on Twitter, dealing with Goodreads imports that were failing, and trying to figure out how to rewrite the app so that the imports would be done in days and not months, there was no time to rest or relax. And then it's June 17th, 2020. And we're still trying to figure out how to get on top of the thousands of people waiting for their Goodreads import when, please get Storygraph, I've had it for 1 day and I'm still losing my mind over how good it is. This was another super popular tweet. Probably because it was accompanied with a 4-slide presentation titled, Why You Should Use Storygraph. They also later added this 5th slide. So our user numbers were growing by hundreds to 1,000 every hour. And by the end of the day, our sidekick queue looked like this. Not only did nobody have their Goodreads import done, nobody had any of our wonderful personalized book recommendations, which were also generated by a background job. The website was at a standstill, and the tweets kept rolling in. Where's my Goodreads import, Storygraph? Where are my recommendations, Storygraph? I was overwhelmed. I was stressed. I couldn't handle this. I didn't know what to do. How did this happen? Just last week, I was so delighted at having reached the 1,000 user milestone. And now we were approaching 10,000 and I didn't want it. I didn't want it at all. I never even wanted a B2C business. It's not what you're supposed to do. Why did I think that I could build an indie bootstrap B2C business as a solo dev? It felt like this was the end. I remember leaving my desk and going to sit in my bathroom. I sat in the dark on top of the closed toilet seat and I held back tears. I wouldn't allow myself to say out loud, I can't do this, but I was real close. How did I end up here? Let's go back. Let's go back to before. I had been very academic growing up and ended up securing a place at the University of Oxford studying philosophy, politics, and economics. I was heading down the investment banking track, something that had been encouraged by my parents. We didn't grow up with money, and investment banking fit into their plans for me having a financially secure future. But after becoming disillusioned with that path, I ended up turning down my graduate banking job. And after winning a competition for a free place, I ended up learning how to code at the Makers Academy software bootcamp in London. Originally, I went there just to build up some rough coding skills in order to be able to communicate with any developers I ended up working with. I definitely had a stereotype of a developer in my head. And not only was that not me, it wasn't for me. But I quickly realized the value of being able to code. And so I put my head down and got stuck in. After graduating, I secured a job at Pivotal Labs. And I spent a year and a half there, mainly working on their platform as a service, Cloud Foundry, before leaving with a colleague, Theo Christian, to start a company called Ignition Works, a hybrid consultancy and product company. Around this time, I started to get interested in the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. I saw it as a way to make sure that I'd always be financially free to invest in myself and any entrepreneurial ventures that I may embark on. I figured out how much I was spending each month in order to live a comfortable lifestyle and funneled the rest away into index funds. I took those principles to Ignition Works, where Theo and I only paid ourselves what we needed to break even as individuals, saving up the rest to later invest in any product ventures. Ultimately, that partnership and our product goals didn't pan out how I'd hoped, so I made the tough decision to leave without a clear next step. Since I owned half of the company, I took half of the money that we'd been saving up, leaving me with 5 years of runway. I wasn't sure what to do next when my friend Saranya Barrett got in touch. So I spent a year working with her on Code Newbie, a community of people learning to code. The goal was to transition it into a product company, but that also didn't work out. And so I found myself at my desk alone on the 3rd of January, 2019. I had 4 years of runway left. That would see me through until the end of 2020. And I'm not sure what to do. I don't have any big ideas that are grabbing me. So I think, why don't I spend some time on my 2 main side projects that I've been mulling over for years, but never have time to work on? One was RunRoute, an app that auto-generated running routes for you. The second was Read Lists, an app that enables you to create and share custom reading lists and track your progress through them on a pretty dashboard. The plan was to spend January working on both of them and see if either of them went anywhere. I decided to take a look at Read Lists first. I was much more excited about books than running. But what to build it in? And now we get to the first of 3 pillars to my process that have served me well, especially at key decision points. And I think they are universal to any SaaS business, especially bootstrapped ones. Spoiler alert! I think the title slide probably gave it away, but despite where we left me, in the dark bathroom, holding back tears, StoryGraph is still around today. We're profitable and serving millions of users and millions of requests. And the biggest question people have is, how did you do it? So when putting together this talk, I wanted to come up with the most helpful and actionable answer. Reflecting back, I could categorize everything that happened into things that were in my control and things that weren't. The things that aren't in your control when running a business are often the things that will either lead to your highest highs or your lowest lows. Think your viral tweets that take you to a new level of popularity, or the entrance of a new competitor that eats into your market share. These things aren't in your control. There's luck involved, and luck isn't always good. You can have bad luck too. But the things that are in your control, ultimately, how you approach building your company and your product, are the things that will determine how you respond to the good luck and the bad. They'll determine how resilient you are to setbacks and how much you can capitalize on opportunity. So while there are so many factors, the 3 key pillars to my approach to building StoryGraph have set us up to be resilient and take advantage of turns of good luck. The first, keep the tech simple. What do I mean by simple? I mean, stick to what you know and aim to use as little of what you know as possible to get the job done. Lean into the most stable, mature, boring platforms and tools. So for me, deciding what to build my readless side project in, the answer was obvious. Rails! It was what I'd studied at bootcamp. It was what I knew I could get moving fast. After all, this was a small side project. With Rails, I'd have a working demo in no time. And if we head back, or should I say jump forwards, to me sitting in my dark bathroom for one moment, part of what gave me the strength to pick myself up and get back out there was knowing that all of the issues I was currently facing had to be solved problems. Companies had scaled with Rails before because they had been forced to. And I also knew that there was a large, experienced, friendly community of people out there that I could seek help from. So back to 3rd of January 2019, I kept the tech simple, went for the boring answer, not worrying about any growth or scaling pain points I didn't have yet. And I got going fast. And I had so much fun. It was the most happy and fulfilled that I'd ever felt while coding on anything. And it made me wonder if this is what people were talking about when they spoke about founder product fit. I'd always been a keen reader, and I found the prospect of working on something that other readers would find valuable so exciting. I realized during that first week in January that books is where I wanted to be. And if I wanted to build something successful in this space, I needed to call upon what would become the second pillar. Keep talking to customers. We all know there's nothing worse than building something that nobody wants. We also all know that we should talk to customers. But do we all know how to do it properly? What does talking to customers properly look like? It means going in with a key research question, with a hypothesis. It means going in with an open mind, with no set answers in mind and no leading questions planned. That means going in with a script. The emphasis is on discovery, not confirmation bias. So it was a bad idea that for the first round of customer interviews I did, I included a demo of the app that I'd been working on for the last couple of weeks. And I said, "What do you think? Would you use this?" My learnings from Rob Fitzpatrick's The Mum Test revealed pretty quickly that people weren't too keen. When they said, "Oh yeah, that does seem cool. Yeah, I'd use it for sure," they were just being nice. So I knew what I had to do. Keep talking to customers, but this time without a demo. Without questions that enable people to just be polite and tell you what you'd like to hear. Without the questions that make people cotton onto your idea or even suspect that you have an idea. Instead, I asked more open-ended questions. I learned more about my interviewees' reading habits and pain points with any current tools that they had. I'd watched each batch of 5 or so interviews back, I summarized each onto sticky notes, and I grouped them into themes on a virtual whiteboard. The learnings from each round helped me to figure out the hypothesis for the next round. And I kept talking to customers, repeating the cycle until something useful to build became clear. I was prepared to walk away if nothing did. But 3 months of talking to customers later, something useful to build did become clear. I had enough information to start building an alpha product. From my customer research, the main pain point in the book space was having one place for consistently high quality recommendations. And so the alpha was purely a personal recommendation service. It was very important that I kept the tech simple, especially at such an early stage of the product's life. Just one round of customer interviews could completely change what I was building. So knowing that I'd only be onboarding small handfuls of people onto the app at any given time, I tried to keep as much of the behind the scenes work as manual as possible. When the alpha users filled out a form in order to get a personalized recommendation, all that happened was that I got an email, went off and did a bunch of research before adding a new recommendation into the system via the backend. Then I sent the user an email letting them know their recommendation was ready. The Rails app itself hardly did anything, but the users didn't know that. And while running this alpha, I kept talking to customers. I had 2 rounds of onboarding. People were onboarded in groups of 5, they used the app for a week, and then I invited them to do a customer interview. I didn't ask them whether they were enjoying the alpha or not. Doing that would have led me back into the trap of, "I really like it, honestly. I'd definitely pay you $5 a month to use it once it's ready." Instead, I asked them questions about how they were using it. Why had they filled out the form for a recommendation twice in quick succession? Why hadn't they logged on? How was their reading going otherwise? I used my learnings from the interviews to build a handful of extra features, and I did this for a couple of months until June 2nd, 2019. Because I was continually talking to customers, I knew when the alpha had exhausted its purpose, when the technical limitations of such a basic product started to clash with the needs of my small handful of users, and it was time to move on. I resolved to spend the next few months building a more fully fleshed out beta product, the spec for which was easy to draw up because I had such a clear understanding of my users' needs and pain points from my research. I was worried about losing momentum with all the people I'd been talking to, so I started a weekly newsletter. The mailing list started with 100 or so people that I'd interviewed or spoken to about my project up until that time. And I built heads down for a couple of months until July 30th, 2019. I started what I called the concierge beta. Concierge because a lot of the product was still manual. Why spend time building a Goodreads importer if it wasn't clear that anybody would want to import their Goodreads data into my app? For now, manually onboarding people would be wiser. I sent out a sign-up form to my newsletter, wisely asking how many books the prospective beta user had in their Goodreads library. I knew just by looking at the responses that some of these people would never be able to join my beta until I had an automated import. Still, I spent hours and hours manually adding people's books to the app. Around this time, I was in Pune, India, keynoting Deck and RubyConf, but I spent most of the trip in my hotel room manually onboarding people to the beta app. And then I did the same thing that I did with the alpha, onboard people in small batches, let them use the app for a week, invite them to a customer interview. I kept doing this until September 2nd, 2019. Even though it was still very basic, I realized that the product was developed enough such that anybody could get value from it, in particular from the long filterable list of books on the homepage. And so, despite being incredibly nervous to do so, I made the beta public. I shared the link and encouraged my newsletter subscribers to do the same. And the feedback started rolling in. Most of it positive, some critical, and a lot of it helpful in figuring out where to go next. It got to a point where I had so many manual requests for books to be added to the site that I had to hire a woman who I met from the books community on Instagram, Abby, to help me part-time. While I had a small group of paying beta testers at this point, I was essentially paying her out of pocket, feeling comfortable doing so, given I was only in the first year of a possible 5 of my runway. Fast forward a couple months after that, and Rob Freelo, so Ron's husband, got in touch. He'd seen me crop up on Twitter, and from a recent tweet of mine, found a link to the archive page of my newsletter. He sat down and read every single issue of the 21 I'd published up until that point, from the beginning until the most recent. Not only did he enjoy the story I was telling, as a reader himself who'd been studying machine learning on the side, he saw an exciting opportunity to help me out. He started helping me here and there in his spare time, but fell in love with this new side project, and working with me, of course, and could so keenly see its potential. He wanted to help accelerate us on our upwards, albeit slow-going trajectory, but knew that would only be possible if he could dedicate more time to it. He felt that his only option was to quit his senior well-paid job in enterprise-level product support to join me full-time. I almost discouraged him at first. It felt like a lot of pressure. Rob, who himself was striving towards financial independence, was going to give up his stable job and 6-figure salary to come and work for, at least initially, nothing. But I also went with what my gut was telling me, that this could prove to be a magical partnership. Rob quickly brought machine learning capabilities to the app, soaking up a lot of the manual work that Abby and I had been doing. And from then on, we were just heads down, repeating the cycle of keeping the tech simple to build the next thing, and continuing to talk to customers to get their feedback. Then we build the next thing as simply as we could, talk to customers again, and we did this for 9 months until we get back to where we left off in the intro. Okay, it's competition time. So far, you've seen 2 of the 3 pillars. Keep the tech simple and keep talking to customers. What is the third one going to be? One person who guesses correctly is going to get a prize at the end of this talk. Just kidding, there's no prize. But just in case I didn't, I now definitely have the attention of everyone in the room, right? Okay, so we're back to June 17th. Back into my dark bathroom, Ultimately, giving up wasn't an option. I had to pull myself together and get on with it. Having kept the tech simple and straightforward, sticking with tools and a community that I was very familiar with, I knew that I must be dealing with solved problems. I wouldn't be the first to build a Rails app that supported thousands of users. And as you now know, I did have Rob, and he was an amazing, encouraging, supportive business partner. But when I emerged from that bathroom, I didn't know that I was about to embark on 2 weeks of what I now call the dark days. First, we had to re-architect how everything worked so that much more than 5 Goodreads imports could happen at any given time, and so that generating recommendations for one person didn't take several minutes. Then we had to work through a whole range of growth scaling issues that neither of us had dealt with before. Database IOPS, anybody? We hardly slept, but we had each other and we kept up the positivity and optimism as best as we could. And after chipping away at all of the resource bottlenecks, mainly through a combination of rewriting code and throwing money at the problem, as they say, by doing things like upgrading our Heroku dynos and database, we were back in business. It took 2 weeks, but we made it. And from that point, we continued to grow by at least hundreds of users each day, all via word of mouth. Whenever we weren't sure what to do, we kept talking to customers. And because of the growth of our Instagram and Twitter audiences after the popular tweets, we had new avenues open to us, like polls. We'd take the learnings from that to improve on the beta, keeping the tech as simple as possible, being ruthless with not solving for pain points we or our users didn't yet have. We continued to grow. And as we did, our costs kept on rising. What were we spending money on? We had a standard SaaS company subscriptions, think Cloudflare, SendGrid, MailChimp. Naturally, paying Abby was a big expense. But our biggest cost was Heroku. Good old Heroku. We wanted to stay independent and we still hadn't figured out product market fit. And so we come to the third pillar, keep costs low. This is not a set it and forget it until you need to upgrade kind of thing. This is a continued exercise for Rob and I, especially Rob, who really takes the lead on this front. At least once a month, we'd review the list of tools we were paying for, experimented with the lowest tiers of various Heroku add-ons, and switched to open source alternatives where possible, all without sacrificing the quality of the product. It helped that we had a wide variety of skills between us. We did as much as we could instead of hiring people, and we put in the time to level up where we needed to. It also helped that we were both financially secure. Rob had been following the principles of FIRE long before I had been, so was well ahead in his financial independence journey. We both had years of runway, and so we didn't need to worry about paying ourselves just yet. While we've been doing the best we could, there's only so far you can go with keeping costs low, especially when you're getting hundreds of new signups every day. At some point, you can't get costs any lower without sacrificing the quality of your product. At some point, even discussing how much further you can get the costs down gets ridiculous. At some point, you have to make money in order to become a sustainable business. Back in January of 2019, when I realized that I wanted to make this side project a full-time business, I dreamt up business models that involved making money from publishers without compromising the privacy and data of our users. After all, Goodreads didn't charge its users anything, so surely me doing so was out of the question. On top of that, most conventional indie bootstrapped wisdom said that you had to go for building a B2B business. I'd already fallen into the trap of building a consumer product. By having the business model rely on publishers though, I'd at least improve on the making money part. However, after discussing my ideas with a friend and mentor, Tam Asala, his response was, the best businesses are where you can make money directly from your customers with no middle entity involved. Given that I wanted Storygraph to fall within the category of the best businesses, I had to find a way that I could provide enough value to our users such that they'd want to pay us. So, back in 2020, with rising costs and no income, we started to think about how we could move towards a freemium model. This was our chance to combine all 3 pillars. Keep costs low. We couldn't build something we weren't going to need. There was no way we were going to use up resources building a paid plan until we had proper validation in the form of pre-orders. Keep the tech simple. What was the quickest way that we could get to pre-orders? A single web page on the app with a pre-order button, powered by the simplest, quickest Stripe checkout integration. No concept of subscriptions, only one currency, USD, because Americans formed 60% of our user base, and a user marked as an early bird in the backend after purchase. We figure out the rest later. Keep talking to customers. Because we've been regularly conducting user interviews and reading and responding to all feedback sent our way via email and our social media channels, although we didn't quite have product market fit yet, we knew what our most popular features were and made up some potential enhancements to those. And so the first version of the page went live on October 5th, 2020. When creating a StoryGraph account, users had an option to check a box labeled "Keep me informed of exciting product updates," and thousands of people had opted into this. So we put together a newsletter for this group of people and waited to see what would happen. Eventually, the orders started to come in. It was very exciting, but also a little bit nerve-wracking. And keeping in with the vein of talking to customers, I manually emailed a random selection of the people who pre-ordered to figure out what had made them do so. And I used their responses to iterate on the page in order to improve conversion, which had started out at a healthy 5%, and good e-commerce rates are typically 2.5% to 3%. There was a clear pattern coming out of this research. I didn't really pay attention to what features were on offer. I just really want to support an independent alternative to Goodreads. I'd always been wary of leaning into this, worrying that we couldn't build a proper business this way, as if it seemed like we were a charity surviving off of support, instead of people needing to pay us in exchange for value. I do now see that there is inherent value in existing as an indie alternative to a popular product. But that was the moment when we decided to fully embrace that piece of learning from our research. After all, users may subscribe for that reason, but the goal would be to make the product so good that they renewed because of product market fit. We took hundreds of pre-orders in the first few weeks of the page being live. We got the conversion up to 6.6%. And for us, that was more than enough validation to build out the platform. Oh, this whole time, we were still in beta. So while taking pre-orders, we were focusing on getting the product to an official launch, including a whole app redesign. We planned this launch for the 1st of January 2021, again, taking opportunity of the new year energy and enthusiasm amongst avid readers. Really, because of the way that we've been iteratively building the product, coming out of beta just meant switching over the domain name. And I was worried that the day would ultimately be anticlimactic, especially for our most active of users. But we still pressed on making an event out of it. I did posts on Instagram and Twitter, asking people to comment if they wanted to be part of the buzz on launch day. And when January 1st came, I personally DM'd the dozens of people who had replied, encouraged them to share the news on their platforms. Making an event of it was a success because on January 1st, 2021, we surpassed 100,000 users. On that day, we turned off our $30 early bird pricing for Plus. We had to check that people would actually pay $50 and also give all the current early birds a little bit of a benefit for having been quick with their pre-orders. So then it was time to focus on building out the Plus plan that over 1,000 people had pre-ordered, some as Christmas gifts. We did warn them. And Plus did eventually launch on 28th of February or 1st of March, depending on where you live. You see, I had started to feel bad that we'd taken tens of thousands of pounds of pre-orders, but all we could tell people was that Plus was coming early 2021. That could technically mean up to April or even May, right? So I decided to back myself and Rob and declare that Plus would launch in February. And well, in the last week of February, after a handful of all-nighters, Plus launched. And while it wasn't quite February for me in the UK any longer, it was February in the US, where the vast majority of our customers lived, and so that's all that mattered. In the end, we had 1,400 pre-orders, making just under $50,000. Of course, that money didn't really feel like ours until the Plus plan had gone live. So now we get to the 4th of May. Because we were always talking to customers, and because we had tens of thousands of followers on social media, we were always aware of our latest, biggest pain point. At the beginning of May, we could ignore our current one no longer. It was starting to impact the number of signups, our lack of mobile app. We had a progressive web app, but no matter how much we, well, mainly Rob, tried to convince people, It wasn't downloaded from the app or Play Store, so as far as people were concerned, it was nothing more than a website bookmark. So what could we do? We had to stick to the pillars of our process. Keep costs low. We couldn't afford an iOS or Android developer, so the job was going to fall to me. Keep the tech simple. What was the simplest way that me, a web developer, with minimal Swift and zero Kotlin experience, was going to build a mobile app in a timely manner? Well, one advantage of me leaning into the mature, large Rails ecosystem meant that other people in the community had likely often run into this very problem, and so tools would have been developed to solve it. Enter Hotwire and Turbo, tools changing the way HTML is written and allowing developers to reduce reliance on JavaScript without sacrificing any of the performance associated with traditional single-page apps. And with the accompanying mobile adapters, they gave us a path towards developing semi-native apps in a reasonable amount of time, with all of the dev being kept in-house. So I started up 2 new repos, and I got coding for about 6 weeks, mixing Ruby with Swift and Kotlin. I remember feeling rather concerned that due to our small team size, including me being the only web and now app developer, I was working on nothing else for such a long time. I was worried that we'd lose the momentum that we'd been building on top of ever since our spikes of June 2020. Turns out that being publicly consistent and transparent for so long meant that we built up a lot of trust amongst our user base. If we weren't as active as we typically were on social media, the assumption was they must be hard at work on the next awesome feature. And eventually, 6 weeks after the mobile app repos were created, we submitted them to the stores and got them approved. As I said, opting for boring, mature, stable tools means that you've likely got a large, experienced community of people on hand, some of whom are real gems. I'm talking about amazing people like Joe Masalotti, who patiently answers DMs from strangers who are at a bit of a dead end in such a friendly and detailed way. Thank you so very much, Joe. You are awesome. Having the apps out and shouting about their launch definitely gave us an extra push in signups, leading us to hitting the 250,000 milestone on July 8th, 2021. 20 days later, I'm fast asleep and my phone rings. It's Rob. There are thousands of people on the app right now and it keeps crashing. Uh-oh. Out of bed I get. Turns out we'd gone viral on TikTok. Jill's baby, someone who we had never heard of before, had made a 44-second video with her face superimposed on the app, highlighting what made it so great. Perhaps most memorable was the video's opening line. All the hot girls are switching from Goodreads to Storygraph, and here's why. This was another all-nighter. We'd never had this many concurrent users before, 1.6 thousand. And something was breaking somewhere. We tried so many things until I realized that some code from the launch redesign was running every single time the homepage was loaded. Not only was the query that was being run incredibly inefficient, its result was not being used anywhere on the page. Yeah. Anyway, so this was eventually fixed, and the video grew to 1.7 million plays and over 300,000 shares. At the end of it all, we were greeted with a nice surprise on the US App Store book charts. We grew by 40,000 users that day, and we kept growing until September 23rd, 2021, the day before my birthday, where we hit 500,000 signups. As we headed towards the end of 2021, we started to see an influx of people, that same January 1st excitement rearing its head. And as our user base grows, our costs are rising by the thousands. How come? Heroku. Heroku costs were killing us. We weren't profitable yet, and as our user base continued to grow, our Heroku costs grew in lockstep. Continually upgrading and looking ahead at the next tier or two up, Rob and I became concerned that our Heroku costs would always outpace our earnings from our Plus subscribers. We would never be profitable. We'd never build a sustainable independent business this way. But you gotta keep costs low. But how do you get rid of Heroku costs? Heroku is the standard, easy, you don't need to hire a DevOps person platform. But we had to do something. Rob had 15 years of operational experience from his prior career, And after months of discussion about this and what various worlds looked like for StoryGraph, we decided to take advantage of that and move towards having him manage our infrastructure. He started painstakingly detailed research into our options. And well, January 22nd, 2022 marked the great migration off of Heroku to Cloud 66. I was so nervous to do this, especially as our only web developer with hardly any infrastructure management experience. Leaving the safe space of Heroku was scary. Rob was amazing at addressing all of my concerns. We spent weeks putting together a step-by-step document for the actual migration. The morning of the migration was 6 hours of non-stop work, babysitting the process until it was all done. Apart from a couple of small hiccups relating to having a working maintenance mode and a database backup command that initially timed out, everything went smoothly. When it was over, Rob and I sat back in our seats feeling immensely proud of ourselves. We'd done it. We'd actually moved off of Heroku with an app that served hundreds of thousands of users and had tens of millions of database rows. In the process, we'd cut our server costs by 80%. Rob, who often ran our support ticket desk on the weekends, decided to check in and make sure everything was okay. Account missing. Where has my account gone? Deleted account. Oh my gosh. Our hearts sunk. How could this happen? I took deep breaths and tried to stay as calm as possible. This couldn't be happening. Turns out the migration had logged every single one of our 760,000 users out of the app. And well, when you haven't had to log into something for, in some cases, years, and you have multiple email addresses, or maybe originally you had a typo in your email address, you will likely struggle to log back in. We eventually managed to match up every single confused customer back to their account. Phew. And we continued to grow until on June 26th of this year, we hit 1 million users. Oh. Thank you. Where are we today? We have 1.2 million registered accounts. We focus on monthly active users, since the average person reads a book a month. And so 25 to 33% of the registered accounts are active at any given time. We have 3 million unique monthly visitors and 36 million page views a month. Each month, we serve 110 million requests, all from that same repo that I started back in June of 2019. We're profitable. In March of this year, our early birds had to take out an official subscription if they wanted to continue using the Plus features, and 62% of them did. I remember feeling very pleased with myself because of the little Easter egg that I put into the renewal code all of the early birds were sent. I knew it was obscure, but I hoped that at least one person would catch it. The closest I got was this from a developer friend, remarking on how long the code was and spotting the egg emoji, but then saying nothing more on the matter. We have 5.3 thousand plus subscribers in total, including those that have taken out subscriptions since the plan officially launched on February 28th of last year. Only 3% of our registered users have given our 30-day free trial a go, and we're looking into ways to increase that proportion. We don't take payment details for the trial, so there's no chance of users accidentally subscribing because they forgot to cancel. Given that, we're incredibly pleased with our 18% conversion rate from trial to paying user. We know that every single subscriber has made a conscious choice to pay us, and that's a fantastic position to be in as an indie bootstrap business. Our monthly churn rate is just under 2%, with a good rate typically falling between 3 and 8%. And our monthly costs are now consistently lower than our monthly recurring revenue from Plus. And we've done all of this with a 3-person team, 2 of us full-time, and a 1-woman dev. How have we done this? And how can you set yourself up with the best chance of doing it too? Keep the tech simple by sticking with what you know, aiming to use as little of what you know, and leaning into the mature, stable, boring technologies. You set yourself up to be able to move and change direction fast, You avoid building things you aren't going to need, and you can rely on a wealth of knowledge already out there on the internet and tap into a large, experienced, and hopefully friendly community. For all of these reasons, having Rails being part of your toolkit is such a wonderful, advantageous thing. And remember, if you're itching for a tech problem, something more exciting to sink your teeth into while you build out your product, any growth or success that you have necessitates that you'll have to get creative at some point. Keep talking to customers. Ultimately, this is the most key. You can keep the tech simple all you like, but if you're building something that nobody wants, you're going nowhere. So invest in learning how to talk to customers properly. There's no one right way to do it, but there are definitely wrong ways. Read the books and blog posts out there and figure out a range of styles that work for you and your team. Critically assess how well you're doing each time and iterate on your own research techniques. There's a reason some people's jobs are solely focused on customer research. It's a skill in and of itself, and you can't take shortcuts with it. And keep costs low. This isn't just starting off with the cheapest plans that you can find and only upgrading when absolutely necessary. This is having regular review points. Do you really need this tool? Do we really need to be on this tier? Have any alternatives come out since we last looked? Can we do this in-house? And this is all within reason. Don't sacrifice the quality and security of your product. Don't sacrifice your user experience. And don't take on too much in-house such that you're distracted from building. Pre-product market fit, you have to do everything you can to keep costs low. It's essential to staying independent and bootstrapped. But, and there are a lot of new innovative funding options available now, seeking investment from a point of profitability with your costs under control is a super powerful position to be in. Ultimately, as you can tell from my story, there is luck involved. There's good timing. Think of those early tweets. You can do all of these things and still not find success. But by consistently following the 3 pillars and having faith in the process, you're setting yourself up to have more chances to try and fail again and again and eventually succeed. You're setting yourself up to be resilient to the bad luck, and you're setting yourself up to capitalize on opportunities when good fortune comes your way. I hope that as you go on to build your businesses, if you ever find yourself having your own dark bathroom moment, you'll think back to this talk. You'll think of the 3 pillars and have faith that you're on the right track. You'll be able to get out of that dark bathroom and get back to work. Thank you so much for listening.